and welcome into DawgNation at Large. I'm Kaylee Mansell with Connor Riley. We've got Connor in person today. And Connor, lately the algorithm on all social medias, apart from Diddy things, has been pushing like extreme Simon Says to me. So I'm hoping that you'll play a little game of Simon Says with me. Are you familiar with the rules?
Hey, do you know what today's day is?
It's October 3rd. We're going to hit on a lot of Mean Girls, but this is the most important thing. We participate?
Sure.
Okay, Simon says hands up. Hands on your nose. Simon says, hand me your phone. Simon says you cannot be on your phone the entire time that we're here. Is it on silent?
No.
Simon says turn it on silent first. Nope. Simon says give it to me and I'll put it over here. Simon says also turn off all Apple Watch notifications too.
I can't do that.
All right. As long as I can see this, we can roll with that, but we have to put it over here. We've got some very important things on today's show. So Simon says, don't worry about your phone. Let's worry about DawgNation at Large instead.
It's the show for the new breed of Georgia Bulldog fan. This is DawgNation at Large with DawgNation insiders Connor Riley and Kaylee Mansell.
Simon also says, get in, losers. We're going shopping today here on today's episode of DawgNation at Large. Here's what we've got going on today's show. Starting with the fact that despite the game played at Alabama, UGA has been receiving positive attention as of late from the media. Then we're going to do our dog bike segment where we'll cover things like Smael Mondon, Nate Frazier, among other things. Then we'll do our best college football memes of the week, and we're going to end with our own Mount Rushmore of UGA rivals, considering this weekend will be the Deep South's oldest rivalry. But let's start with this. After UGA's close win at Kentucky, the media was quick to turn the tide on them. No pun intended. However, after the near comeback in the game versus Alabama, it seems to me, Connor, that the tides have changed yet again.
You really love the Tide, don't you?
I do. I mean, you can't not use that pun there.
You could. You'd be an adult. Yeah, look, I think this is one of the things where if you're a Georgia fan, you're closer to this game, you're frustrated with another loss to Alabama. But I think when you take a look back, there are a lot of people out there pointing to the fact that Georgia at one point outscored Alabama in this game 34-5. I think when you're able to continue to build on that, you do things in the second half there, you come all the way back and take the lead. You know, again, if you're a Georgia fan, yes, you're devastated about another loss to Alabama. You're frustrated with how they started that game on both the offensive and the defensive side of the ball. But there are still some positives there. I think the big thing moving forward, if you're a Georgia fan, look, the national media is going to heap praise on you for fighting back, for having that sort of moral victory. Georgia just doesn't operate that way. And so I'll be interested in seeing how much of what they did in the second half against Alabama is sustainable going forward. Are they going to play that aggressive on the offensive side of the ball? Are they going to have to abandon the run like they did in that game? Or do they find some balance where they're still able to have that explosive nature on the offensive side of the ball while also still being able to mix in the run game?
So Joel Klatt, a well-respected member of the media who is also a major Ohio State stan and has been known to be very critical of Georgia in the past. He even had positive things to say about Georgia's second half performance. Here's Joel Klatt on that.
I saw in the second half was a defense in Georgia figure out the offense in Alabama. What I saw in the second half was a team in Georgia start to pick apart the weakness that I actually talked about that Alabama has, which is their secondary. And so that's why I'm sitting here. And if I'm Carson Beck, I'm sitting here on Sunday and I'm thinking to myself, please get me another chance at that game. Please, just get me Bama. I don't care. I'll play him in the parking lot. I just want one more quarter, one more snap. We just ran out of time. That's what I'm feeling if I'm Carson Beck and Kirby Smart, for that matter, because the defense had largely figured them out until that long, ridiculous play from Ryan Williams, which was sensational. On the flip side, if I'm Alabama, I'm like, man, we kind of escaped. They had us.
So I think what Joel is saying here is more reflective of the narrative that we heard over the summer about the UGA offense being morally and potentially Carson Beck being one of the better quarterbacks in the league. So I feel like we had that over the summer, and then there were some questions about the offense, and now it seems like it's coming full circle to the conversations that were happening over the summer.
Yeah, and I don't know if I totally agree with Klatt's analysis there. I think, one, Georgia, you feel better about their run defense and their ability to shut things off in the middle of the field. but I think any time that Alabama went to an empty set and they just had Jalen Milroe back there spread with 5 wide receivers or pass catchers, they kind of got whatever they wanted against that Georgia defense. And so that's something that obviously they're going to have to figure out. Georgia, I think Kirby Smart admitted they weren't exactly prepared for a look like that. But you do take some positives away from that. You feel better, I think, about the interior, your defensive line, which had been a question to this point in the season. And now as you get potentially Jordan Hall back, Michael Williams playing more snaps, you feel better there. On the offensive side of the ball, look, we were talking a lot about how poorly the offensive line played against Kentucky. I know they gave up 3 snaps, but on nearly 60 dropbacks, one of those was Carson Beck, which ultimately led to a fumble because he was holding onto the ball too long. And then the other 2 sacks were just a math issue where they had more guys coming than Georgia could have blocking. So I think you feel much better about the lines of scrimmage coming out of this game, regardless of everything else that happened. And ultimately, if you're Georgia, that's where you want to be at the end of the season, where you do have a dominant offensive line and a very strong defensive line. And I do feel that you can come away from this Alabama game, result aside, feeling good about those 2 position groups.
Yeah, you mentioned the positives. I do think there's a lot of positive things to take away, but I do feel like it's important that we also address the negative, because I think the comeback was so substantial that maybe people are forgetting the fact that Georgia has yet to play a full 4-quarter game outside of what we saw at Tennessee Tech. In fact, Alabama was the only game this far where Georgia scored a touchdown in the first half. That has to change moving forward.
Yeah, and Tennessee Tech doesn't even go here. They just have a lot of feelings. So I think if you're Georgia, yes, you want to start and you want to play a complete game this week. Starting against Auburn, a team that is finding ways to lose, but I also think is probably better than the record indicates. And so you've got to go out there. You've got to find a way to start fast. And I think they did that in a way on the offensive side of the ball. The plays were there. They just didn't execute. I think once the defense fell behind and was down 28-0, I think in the second quarter the offense started pressing a little bit more. And that's why the offense, I think, was a lot worse in the second quarter than it was in the first quarter there. So they've got to find a way to go out there and execute, get stops early, because I do think with this Auburn team in particular, coming off a tough home loss against Oklahoma, they've already lost 3 games this season. It's always important to start fast, especially for a Georgia team that has not done that so far this year. But if you do that against Auburn, I do wonder if this Auburn team might lay down just because of all they've already been through and the fact that, okay, now they're down early in this game. It makes it maybe a much more winnable game. So it's always important to start fast. I think we're talking about this Georgia team a lot differently right now if they did that against Alabama, but especially this week with all the issues that they've had to this point. I think that's why it's so important that they start fast.
So we'll talk about Carson Beck's performance here in just a second, but since you bring that up, I do want to ask, Auburn is a team at this point where, I mean, they have absolutely nothing to lose. They're not going to make the college football playoff. It's kind of in shambles right now. Does a team like that who literally has nothing to lose, does that scare you at all?
I don't know if scare is the right word, but this is a team we saw a year ago where Georgia and Auburn were in a 4-quarter game, and Georgia didn't start fast in that game. They had a lot of sloppy turnovers at points in there, and they found a way to win, but a large part of that is because Brock Bowers was excellent that day, and they don't have Brock Bowers out there on the field on Saturday. So it's an Auburn team that Hugh Freeze has always given Kirby Smart some issues, and so I'm going to be interested in seeing how Georgia goes about playing for this game. I know it'll go with the flow show. There's a lot of chatter about, is Georgia going to cover this spread? I expect this to be maybe a little bit closer game than some people anticipate, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Georgia does get that fast start. They do turn the page from last week and come out and really put Auburn down early.
All right, so let's talk about Carson Beck now. He finishes the Alabama game with 439 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, but also 3 interceptions, the first of the year. Now, Carson Beck's performance drew mixed reviews, but mostly because of what he was able to accomplish in the second half. I do think that he's received more positive attention. Even Kirk Herbstreit went as far as to list him as one of his top performing players of Week 5, of course, after Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams. At this point, if you're a Georgia fan, you've been personally victimized by Ryan Williams, can you please raise your hand? However, I will say, it is, in terms of Kirk Herbstreit, I know that he might not be DawgNation's favorite media personality, but he also might be one of the most famous sports media personalities out there. Yeah.
For college football, he's the #1 analyst.
He would definitely make an argument for it. Now, he's been more consistent in his praise of Carson Beck even whenever he was starting out last year, but I have to ask, in seeing this and knowing that he's calling these games, for him to put Beck behind Milroe and Williams, does that speak more to Carson Beck's performance, or do you think there's maybe a certain narrative that's being pushed here?
I think it speaks to more what we saw from Carson in the second half of that game. 439 yards is the most a quarterback has ever thrown for under Kirby Smart. Obviously, 50 pass attempts, that's not somewhere where Georgia wants to live offensively, but for as poor as he played in the first half, where, the first interception wasn't his fault. That was Arian Smith running a wrong route. The second interception just can't happen. The safety is tough on an intentional grounding play where that could have gone either way. The third interception, that's just something you live with when you're trying to make a comeback there. Ball could have been a little bit better, sure, but I think the fumble that he had in that second interception were the two types of plays that he can't make. But I do think there's probably something to Carson Beck, feeling a lot of external pressure, putting a lot of pressure on himself to go out there and be this elite quarterback and go out there and play great. And he hasn't necessarily started great at all this season, but I think coming out of halftime there's probably a looseness, a calmness to him where I was like, where I can't play any worse than I just did. And so I think that maybe freed him up a little bit. And now that the expectations are lowered a little bit from a national standpoint, I don't think Carson Beck is going to win a Heisman Trophy. I don't think he's going to have a Joe Burrow season, as someone who predicted that. So I think that maybe frees him up to be a little bit more of himself and go out there and just play loose. And I think that's what you saw in the second half of this game. And I think that made a big difference for why Georgia was ultimately able to come back and take a lead in the game. Unfortunately, just not able to finish it off.
Yeah, when I went back and watched the game, I felt like it was truly a tale of two halves for Carson Beck. The first half might be the worst that we've ever watched Carson play, and the second half might be one of the best halves that we've ever seen him play. But now, you mentioned the Heisman, this is just completely out of question.
I don't know if it's completely out of the question. It's a long season. They're going to have major statement games against Texas, against Tennessee, maybe against Alabama again in the SEC championship game. But I think with what you saw with Jalen Milroe, like Carson Beck, I can't advise you to put money on Carson Beck winning the Heisman Trophy right now. But it's something where he knows he has to play better. And he said as much after the game. He was upset. He was not happy with how he played. Even if he did excel in the second half there, I think Carson knows and understands he's going to be judged on wins and losses, and that's a game that they ultimately lost, and he did play a part in that loss.
So here's the thing. I think it is interesting to see how the national media has responded to Georgia's performance. And then I listened to Tuesday's episode of DawgNation Daily with Brandon Adams, and it made the wheels in my head start turning a little bit. I want to show you guys this on the screen right here. This is our favorite conspiracy theorist, Brandon Adams, on the national media pushing this positive Georgia narrative.
The coverage that Georgia gets from the media is about to get a lot more positive. It is. It is. Now that Georgia's less dominant, the media is going to like Georgia more. The media loved what happened on Saturday. All of a sudden, Georgia's playing the same kind of games everybody else plays. Because one of the things that the media likes is the sort of chaotic nature of college football. It makes it different than the NFL. You know that. That you can have a team be up 28-0 and then have the other team that's down 28-0 essentially play as the better team for most of the rest of the game. College football creates those types of situations all the time. And the media that's in the business of selling college football, they love that chaos. The chaos makes the games interesting. Georgia, for the most part, over the course of the last 3 seasons, hasn't really been a participant in that chaos. You get what I'm saying? And so, therefore, that to the media is boring. The media has hated Georgia because they're boring. But now that Georgia's less dominant, to the eyes of the media, they're also going to be less boring. So now you're going to see a lot more favorable coverage for Georgia. It's almost counterintuitive. You would think that Georgia losing, all of a sudden now the media gets to say, we told you this couldn't last for Georgia. But the truth is this version of Georgia, the one that may win but not quite so dominant, and some of this in more thrilling fashion than the sort of death marches of the past, the media is actually going to like this version of Georgia. Watch and see if the coverage of UGA doesn't get a lot more favorable moving forward.
So I love this theory for Brandon, but I would say that you're probably the more reasonable one between us two. Is there any truth to this, or is this just our friend BA stirring the pot?
I love BA. I guess we're running his reruns here now and getting his sloppy seconds on DawgNation at large. I think with Georgia, sure, it's going to be in vogue for the rest of the season to say, hey, Georgia can still win the national title coming off that loss there. I do think there's something to be said about some people celebrating the fact that Georgia is no longer seen as this dominant, unbeatable juggernaut. This was the first time they lost a regular season game since November of 2020. And so with that in mind, I think that you're going to see some people say, hey, Georgia's still a really great team, certainly capable of winning it all. But with the schedule that we know they have going forward, that's really going to be put to the test, because if you're talking college football playoffs still, you've got at Texas, home against Tennessee, at Ole Miss. Georgia's going to have to go 2-1 in those games and win the rest of them, Auburn, Mississippi State, UMass, Georgia Tech, to get to 10-2. And I think a 10-2 Georgia team, you're probably hosting a first-round playoff game as probably the 7th or the 8th seed there. And so if you're that Georgia, again, you've got to navigate that tricky schedule. But I can tell you right now, if Georgia's a 10-2 team in the playoff, they're going to be the team that gets circled as you do not want to play this team because they're going to be able to figure some things out. And they've got a chance to do that here upcoming in the schedule, especially with the game against Texas looming in a couple of weeks, as well as Auburn and Mississippi State at home beforehand.
So to bring all this to a close, what the national media is saying is cool, and probably more people care about what they have to say than what you and I have to say. But from your perspective, after watching what happened in the Alabama game, how did your impression of Georgia change?
Well, as someone who thought they were going to go undefeated and win every game, that was certainly a tough pill to swallow there. But I think if you're Georgia, look, they got out-schemed in the first part of that game, and that's something that we haven't seen Georgia do a whole lot. And yes, they came back and made adjustments, I thought, offensively. I thought when they fell behind 28-0, when they didn't necessarily go out there and execute in the first quarter, they really pressured themselves into making more mistakes in the second quarter, which made it a more unwinnable game. But, again, that's about as good of a second half as you can go out and play. Ryan Williams and Jalen Milroe are two fantastic players. I don't know if Georgia's going to see a better quarterback this season than Jalen Milroe. I don't think they're going to see a better wide receiver than Ryan Williams. So you're able to look past some of those things. But Alabama is the standard that which Georgia is measured against. It's the one team that has beaten them consistently. And when you come out as flat as you did, after a whole offseason of talking about how much that game meant to you, it does force you to sort of rethink, okay, what might be the ceiling for this team? I still think they can win a national title, but I'm not as ironclad lock it in as I was prior to last Saturday.
All right, last thing I promise. I feel like after the game, a lot of people were on social media saying that this is not going to be the last time that these two teams play. They're going to play again, maybe even for a third time. If Georgia and Alabama were to match up again, do you think Georgia comes out with the win?
I mean, it's so hard to say because injuries are going to play a factor there. You saw Michael Williams limited. I think maybe if he's healthier, that solves some of the edge issues there. On our Go With The Flow show beforehand, I say I always pick Alabama in this situation, and I made the mistake of picking Georgia. Until I see Georgia do it consistently, I'm just going to keep picking Alabama against Georgia because for whatever reason, they find ways to lose games against Alabama when they dominate everyone else. And I don't really know what it is, and it's sort of unexplainable. But until I see Georgia consistently do it, I don't know that I can give them the benefit of the doubt against Alabama, no matter who the coach is at this point.
I mean, your pants are kind of like a crimson color. You a closeted Alabama
This
fan?
is maroon.
Okay, it's closer to crimson than anything else. Please let us know in the comments. It is crimson.
This is maroon.
What is the difference?
Crimson is a little bit more red, whereas this is a little bit more purple.
All right, we're going to have to agree to disagree. In just a moment, we're going to come back and we're going to talk more about the Auburn game as well as Georgia's issues with third down conversions. We'll talk some Nate Frazier, but we want to remind you guys that our Dog Bite segment is always brought to you by Zagoria Law Firm. And what we love about Zagoria Law Firm here on DawgNation at Large is that they're the only law firm in the state that specializes people that have been bitten by dogs. That's right, dog fans. They're the official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs. They literally wrote the book on how to win these cases. So if you or a loved one has been hurt by someone else's dog, give them a call at 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's DOGBITE. Or check out their website at ZagoriaLaw.com. And it wouldn't be Dog Bites without Zagoria Law. This is Dog Bites. All right, second week in a row, they've just been giving us nonstop content. Let's start with maybe something a little bit more on the negative side, but it needs to be addressed, and even Kirby Smart has addressed it this past week. Last year, UGA led the NCAA in third down conversions with 55%. Now they're 107th in the country, only converting 33% of the time. Is this something to be concerned about?
Yeah, and I'm not surprised that Georgia has regressed in third downs. That's just something that year to year I don't think is necessarily replicable. And Kirby Smart talked about it this week. Look, they got to do a better job on first and second down and not putting themselves in long distance situations. I don't think that they're going to finish the season at 107th in third down conversions. And I think they're going to continue to climb, and they'll find ways to scheme up and do better there. But it's not the same offense that we saw a season ago, and third down success was such an important part there as to why they were as dominant as they were.
I will say I did find a lot of enjoyment in the Alabama game and watching Georgia always go for the fourth down. They had an extra down to waste, so I thought that was a nice way to switch the game up and see some different schemes.
Yeah, and Kirby Smart traditionally not a super aggressive coach, and so I think, again, I think so much of that is dictated by the way the game had played out to that point. You're down 28-0, 30-7 at halftime. But I think maybe that's something going forward where Kirby has seen the success that they have there. You have the talent advantage. Why not try and use the math advantage there as well? And maybe going forward, you do see this Georgia team maybe be a little bit more aggressive, whereas in the past, Kirby Smart has traditionally, I think, been a more conservative coach when it comes to fourth down and, punting, kicking field goals, things like that.
All right, so this weekend, Georgia will play in the Deep South's oldest rivalry game, but I'm not necessarily sure if it's still a rivalry now. Now, all-time record UGA leads 64-56-8, but the last time that Auburn beat Georgia in Athens was in 2005. Don't remember it. You can go ahead and just not make the age joke. I went ahead and made it for you. But since 2005, Georgia's 15-5 against Auburn. Most recent loss was November 11, 2017. Georgia ends up coming back to beat Auburn in the SEC Championship a few months later. I mean, I guess you could say that in the last 2 decades, this game has no longer become the rivalry that it once was.
Look, I don't think anyone, unless you're part of the western part of the state, sees this Georgia-Auburn rivalry as a lot. And look, Auburn, because of the turmoil, because of the coaching turnover, the end of the Gus Malzahn era, Brian Harsin, Hugh Freeze, they have not, I think, sustained to the level that Georgia has. Like, Tommy Tuberville was the last coach to beat Georgia in Athens, and he is now currently a United States Senator. So I think that there's a lot that Georgia has done to, I think, take back the pull of this rivalry. But there are still some great games that Auburn has been able to win. Obviously, the prayer of Jordan Hare, that 2017 game, they just dominated that day in Jordan Hare. But they've really struggled in Athens. They haven't been able to move the ball that well. And I'm going to be really interested this Saturday what happens. If Auburn's good, I think it's one of those things of, Georgia fans will take it more seriously. But when Auburn has been as mid as they have been in recent years, it becomes a lot more difficult, I think, to sell it as this big-time rivalry.
It's also Georgia's homecoming game. Is that a stab at Auburn?
Probably in some small way, but again, you're limited there. You want to get a lot of people to come back for this game, and I think that this made a lot more sense than Mississippi State.
All right, well, we'll see how it all plays out, and we'll get to that next week. Let's move on to Nate Frazier, someone who made a significant impact in the Clemson game. Have not seen much of him since. Now, you got to give Georgia a little bit grace in this situation because you're not really going to utilize the run game versus Alabama, but I surely thought this was someone that we would see get more reps in the Kentucky game.
Right, and I think the big thing with Nate Frazier is that Cash Jones had 27 snaps in this game. Now, Cash Jones is Georgia's best pass-blocking running back. He's also, I think, an incredible pass catcher out of the backfield, and so naturally this game just sort of suits him more. But Nate Frazier didn't play in the first half against Kentucky and then didn't play at all against Alabama. And we saw him make a noticeable impact in that game against Clemson. So I'm going to be interested going forward, just what does Nate Frazier's role look like with this team? Because obviously Trevor Etienne is Georgia's best running back. He should lead this team in carries there. We heard Kirby Smart say as well that they wanted to get Branson Robinson some more carries potentially as well, had the game flow sort of dictated it there. So Nate Frazier is one of the more talented freshmen on this team. We've already seen him make a big impact. But with the way that his season is playing out and the way that Trevor Etienne and the rest of this offense has looked, I wonder just what his role is going to look like for the rest of the season.
Do you think the lack of playing time is because the others in front of him are just simply better, or because Kirby's more hesitant to play a guy who hasn't been in the program as long?
I think it's both. It's not that he's hesitant to play someone who hasn't been in the program as long, because Trevor Etienne arrived just a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe a freshman thing, an adjustment to the college level, an adjustment to being consistent in practice all the time, being consistently great in practice. And if you're able to do that, that's how you go out there and earn those carries in games. So I think that it'll be interesting this week. Look, it's now a story of, what's going on with Nate Frazier, how do they get him involved, because he makes such a big impact in that first game, and then you see what Ryan Williams does, you see what Zabin Brown does for Alabama. Mm-hmm. Georgia was not able to get the same level of production out of their freshmen as Alabama was, and that made a difference in that game.
I've been waiting for this one. Let's talk about Smael Mondon, because he did appear in front of the media on Monday. And then the injury report comes out. Smael is going to be out from the game on Saturday, but for unknown reasons. What is the benefit, or I guess what is the purpose of putting unknown on there?
Well, they don't, Georgia's not going to want to reveal anything there, and I think that this is something that probably happened either on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday at practice when this injury came up. Look, the fact that we got a chance to talk to Smael on Monday, again, I think shows that this is an unexpected injury, and it's something that is going to impact this Georgia team. I know not everyone has been thrilled with how Smael played so far this year, but he did play a key role in forcing an Alabama turnover, knocking a ball loose that Dan Jackson ultimately picked off. And there's just something to be said about a guy who has started for 3 years, has played and started in a national championship game, has done a lot for your program. I know a lot of people like the upside that, say, C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson bring, but there's just no replacing the institutional knowledge that Smael has. And so however long he's out, this is going to be an issue. And while Georgia still has a ton of talent in that inside linebacker room, we can throw Jalen Walker in there. Maybe this creates a pathway for, say, Justin Williams or Chris Cole. I think that this is going to be a loss that is somewhat felt by this Georgia defense.
I'm going to go full Brandon Adams here. Is mono going around the Georgia football team from sharing water bottles?
I don't think that Smael Mondon is out with mono.
I think I would rather him be out with mono than be out with a real injury, but it doesn't look like the case right now.
I mean, London Humphreys is going to miss this game this weekend as well. And so mono, again, that's, look, I'm no expert in mono, but from people that have had it, that can be a long-term injury.
Yeah, some say upwards of 6 months. All right, I'm going to end with this. I'm not even looking at Connor, and I know he's got a smile on his face right now because of what I'm about to say. I'm going to take some accountability here, but I'm also going to give some credit to myself as well while we do this, because I do deserve a little credit. Here's the thing. I have been very adamant that Georgia cannot have a perfect regular season. When I looked at the schedule, the only loss that made sense to me was a Georgia loss at Texas. I just wasn't sold yet on the fact that Jalen Milroe could work in a Kaylee DeBoer offense so quick, so I just didn't think that the loss came at Alabama. I maybe should have known better, and now my mind has changed. But that's just because I thought they would lose one game of the regular season, and although it did not come to Texas, they did lose a game. I mean, maybe I'm psychic, maybe I have ESPN or something, but now that Georgia has taken the loss at Alabama, I don't think that they're going to take a loss at Texas. I think they'll win every game from here on out. You could come for me in the comments. I've already had a long self-reflection with myself, so there's nothing that you can say that will hurt my feelings, but that's how I feel moving forward, and that's where I stand on things now.
Snip, snap, snip, snap.
No, we're making Mean Girls reference, not Office references today.
Look, it's a Georgia team that, if they're going to win a national title, I think they're going to have to run the table. If they lose to, say, Texas in October at home to Tennessee, that probably tells you this can still be a very good Georgia team. They can accomplish a lot of things, maybe even get, say, a semifinal or a national championship. But I think if you see them drop games against the Texas, against the Tennessee, this might not be the same level of caliber team that Georgia has been in recent years.
All right, DawgNation, if you get tired of seeing our faces on your video channels, or maybe if you just don't have time to watch the show on any DawgNation video channel, I want to remind you guys that you can listen to us wherever you go on the DawgNation podcast feed, wherever you listen to. Make sure to check that out. Check out DawgNation at large, as well as our many other shows that we have here. And with that, it's time for what has become a staple in DawgNation at large. This is Meme Machine.
Who's that coming down the track? Who's that coming down the track? It's a Meme Machine, round the block. It's a Meme Machine, round the block. Go, no!
All right, this is Meme Machine, and on top of getting to share our favorite college football tweets from the week, we also get to bring in our favorite person on the show, none other than Cody Chaffins.
Yeah, apparently on Thursdays we wear black, everybody.
Yeah, I was thinking that as soon as you came up. I didn't know if you were going to come in costume or what, but we're always happy to have you here.
Yeah, it's strange to have Connor in studio. I got to see Connor Riley in person. It was pretty cool.
All right, and let's go ahead and get things started because we've got some more fun stuff in store lately. Let's go with our first meme. Connor.
Yeah, classic Alonzo Mourning gif. Georgia fan Bionic B, me after considering the first half last night. Plenty of ball left, go Dogs. Look, there were some bleak online social media posts when Georgia was down 28-0 in that game and 30-7 at halftime. I know there were certain people out there that were tweeting scores of the Braves-Royals games to try and uplift the spirits. But look, if you're Georgia, you still got a long season ahead. I think this is one of the benefits of a 12-team playoff where you can really focus on the season itself, and there's so much football still to be played that you don't have to start fretting about, are we going to make it into the playoff? What does this loss to Alabama do to our playoff chances? So I think if you're a Georgia fan, look, obviously Saturday stunk, but it is not the season ender that it would have been in some years past.
Hey, let me drop this knowledge on you. So you picked that meme totally out of the blue, right? I will tell you that Bionic Bee, Billy Harley, is actually a very close personal family friend. He and my brother were roommates at Georgia their freshman year. Love Billy. He lives out in Colorado now, but he's a big DawgNation fan. So what's up, Billy, out there?
Shout out to Billy.
Yeah, we did not know that, but there you go. All right, Kaylee, what you got?
If you guys don't follow Antonio Brown on Twitter, you should. Some of them are really wild, but he does a great job. So this is a quote tweet, came from College Game Day. I'm sure you guys may have seen this. It was everywhere. It was a sign that said, "My wife is having a baby, but I chose to be here. Roll Tide." And Antonio Brown, being the wonderful tweeter that he is, he said, "Pray for his cousin, #CTESPN. You know, it's just like people always come for Georgia about the speeding tickets and the barking thing, but the Alabama cousin thing is never going to go away, and I will never stop laughing at it." Here we go. Smart comment. Just go ahead.
No, look, this is less about the praying for cousins or whatever thing. If your wife's having a baby, why are you at College Game Day? It's not like Alabama hasn't hosted College Game Day a bunch of times. It's not like they're going to Cal for the first time this week. Like, you need to be there for your wife.
Wow, not the response I was expecting from you.
Like, we got to grow up. It's College Game Day. They've done the show hundreds of times. They're going to do it again at Alabama. Like, this is not something I would miss the birth of my child for.
Your aura points went up just one in my mind. All right, Cody, bring us on home.
All right, so mine is saw this online, and I just got a chuckle at it, so I felt like I needed to share it with everybody. This says, Carson Beck and Tom Petty are the same person, and he's just a vampire that shaved, faked his death, went to Georgia football to hide his agelessness or agelessness, changed my mind. And you look at the picture, and you think, Gainesville and Jacksonville aren't that far away in Florida, so Tom Petty, which, we're going to talk about rivals later on in this show. He's a Florida Gator, but you know what? I can kind of see it there from Carson.
Do you have a favorite Tom Petty song?
First off, this is so disrespectful to Tom Petty. Gosh, I have a lot.
Tom
I mean, I grew up listening to this with my grandparents. I'm always going to love Mary Jane's Last Dance. I've always said if I had a daughter, which I'm very advocate on not having kids, but if I did, I would name her MJ. So maybe let's go with them.
Okay.
And okay. I guess we're done.
Yeah.
All right. So now that Connor's here in person, we wanted to switch some things up today for our fun segment since Georgia and Auburn are playing this weekend. It got us thinking about who are the greatest Georgia rivals. In our personal opinions, this is the Mount Rushmore. I just want to inform you that this is not a Connor Kaylee showdown. You don't have to be rude. You don't have to be overly nice. We're just giving our opinions, and we're going to respect each other's opinions. Can you handle that?
I don't know if I can handle that. That's going to be a big ask.
If you guys need to put him on mute, I respect
you
that.
guys, you're in person now. You can reach out and do your own muting, if you will.
I have your phone over here. Keep that in mind. I have the power today.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to go first. I guess we'll go, the order is important. We'll start with the least important to most important. So for number 4 for me, I'm going to say Alabama, because even though people might not view them as true rivals, when Georgia and Alabama play, it means something to a lot of people, and it's always going to be intense, and it's always going to not just involve Georgia fans, Alabama fans. Every single person has an opinion on that game, so that's why I'm going to put in Alabama at number 4, because not a true rival of Georgia, but the game is always going to mean something. Number 3, I feel like I'm doing the Dance Moms, Abby Lee Miller, period. So for number 3, it's the one that it's good, but I'm waiting on it to be great, and that's Georgia Tech. I feel like you have to put Georgia Tech in here just because of the in-state rivalry. Even though it has not been competitive at all, it's still one of those games that I feel like everyone has a specific connection to Georgia Tech, and this year it's going to mean a little something different when they play it on a Friday. So we'll see if that changes anything. But I really didn't want to put them on there, but you can't. It can't be a rivalry list without the in-state rival. Number 2, this is where things start to get a little bit personal, because I know that you don't feel this way, and that's okay. That's why we're doing personal opinions. It's Tennessee, and it might just be where I'm from, how the northwest corner of Georgia feels about this game, but it's going to be Tennessee. And I think that's because growing up, watching my family members, we won't say who, play video games, that was who I was always taught that we don't like. We don't like them. Orange is just an absolutely hideous color. I did not like going to Neyland Stadium last year. I think for me, this is the game that I'm always going to be more nervous about. So I'm going to go Tennessee for number 2 pick. And then for number 1, I'm going to go Georgia, Florida. I feel like neutral site really epitomizes the true ideal of a rivalry where it's 50-50. Even though Florida is in absolute shambles right now and it's been so fun to watch, it's still one of those games that no matter the records, no matter what things look like, you always have to go in there wondering, like, in a rivalry game like this, anything can happen. So I'm going to go Florida for my number 1. So to wrap it up, 4, Bama, 3, Georgia Tech, 2, Tennessee, number 1, Florida. Notice how I did not put Auburn on there.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'd point out, yes, you have Tennessee over Georgia Tech and over Auburn. You know that Auburn and Georgia Tech both have more recently beaten Georgia than Tennessee has.
That's fine. I mean, we're going personal things, the way that my heart and my head feel when we play these games.
Okay.
All right. Also, when they play these games. Caught myself. You're welcome. All right. So let's go ahead and go with, I believe it's Cody.
All right. So when I pick Georgia's rivals, and I kind of think about the annoyance factor, right? Like, who can you not lose to? Who do you not want to have to hear for 365 days? So that kind of came into it. And so my number 4, annoyance factor, very high when you consider the song Rocky Top. I will consider Tennessee Georgia's 4th biggest rival. For me personally, I go back to the Phil Fulmer days when you just couldn't beat him. You finally get the hobnail boot game. That set the rivalry up. You also had those great moments, I think, back to the Hail Mary that they won. So there were great moments in this rivalry. They're a team you just don't want to lose. I don't want to listen to those people. So that is number 4. Number 3, now again, if you're talking a rivalry, both sides got to win. That's what we keep talking about. Well, Georgia and Alabama, then is that a true rivalry if Georgia's only won 1 out of the last 9 against Alabama? But I think this is a budding rivalry. I think it is, the connections. You always have great connections, right? So Kirby Smart's connection to Alabama is part of it, kind of like the Auburn, what was Vince Dooley and Pat Dye kind of switching places. So I would say Alabama is a rival of Georgia now, especially with the recent history. It always seems to mean something. Again, people you just don't want to lose to. Then number 2, one that hurts my heart. So I was in college when Georgia could not beat Florida. And so going down to that stadium, and you think the Corey Smith song, they ought to burn it down. That's the way we felt so many times, Georgia and Florida. So my hate is probably the strongest for Florida. I don't want to see them win anything, but they're my second because I think my top Georgia rival still is Georgia Tech. It is the team that, Dan McGill, the late Bill Hartman used to call the enemy, right? And it still means a lot. That's a team that's so close that you don't want to lose to each year. We all do have personal connections, whether it's my uncle or my brother-in-law who went to Georgia Tech, and they make way more money than me and think they're so much smarter, and you just don't want to lose to those folks. So even though they are really little brother, I feel like, and that's not real competitive recently, it's a team you don't want to lose to. So that is mine. Tennessee, Alabama, Florida, and Georgia Tech gets the George Washington spot.
So you also did not have Auburn on there, despite it being the Deep South's oldest rivalry.
No, my hate for Auburn, I don't know what it is, but my hate for Auburn just isn't as strong for everybody. And, Auburn was, again, really good when I was in college. And you talk about that 05 game. I was there in the student section. As Georgia lost that game, it felt like you should have won. But for some reason, I think Alabama's kind of moved in to replace Auburn as a rival there.
Yeah, all right, so I'll close this out with the correct order of Georgia's rivals right now.
There are no right or wrong answers.
I have Alabama at number 4. Look, when these teams play, there are stakes on the line. Georgia has won in this series, so it is at least a rivalry in that sense. They've each won a national championship against each other. I think, obviously, as Cody mentioned, the Nick Saban, Kirby Smart factor, I think only propels this. And so going forward, we'll see how often these teams play. We'll see how it changes now that Nick Saban's retired. But at this moment in time, I have Georgia-Alabama as the number 4 rivalry. Number 3, I actually have the wherewithal to put Auburn on here. When I was a sophomore in college, I was watching the Georgia-Auburn game with a bunch of buddies. Georgia falls behind a lot in that game. They rally back. They take the late lead. They are facing a 4th and 10 where if they get a stop, they win. And then the prayer at Jordan-Hare happens. I was so despondent after that game. I walked to the nearest convenience store, grabbed a bag of Krispy Kreme mini crawlers, and proceeded to eat the entire bag in that night. Just losing to that team stinks. I'm not big on the whole, they couldn't have gotten in here. But I am at least a little sympathetic to that in the event that Georgia loses to Auburn, because that is a popular thing that people that go to Auburn couldn't get into UGA. Number 2, I'm going with Florida. Just, again, the fact that, as Kaylee said, it's in Jacksonville, I think adds to this rivalry. When Georgia lost the infamous Fatone Bauta game, which for my money is the worst Georgia game I have ever seen played. I was supposed to stay with my brother in Statesboro, but I was just so annoyed after that game that I did the full send 6-hour drive from Jacksonville to Athens. Got in so late that it was the same day that daylight savings occurred, and so you spring back an hour. I had gotten in so late that the clock had already moved back an hour there. Just losing to Florida, it's never fun. And again, you feel the angst, I think, going into that game because of all the weirdness that comes with it being in Jacksonville. And then my number 1, it's the same number 1 as Cody's. It's Georgia Tech. You lose that game, it's usually your last game of the year. You're certainly your last regular season game. And it just leaves you with a bad taste in your mouth for pretty much the rest of the offseason. I can think back to the 2014 game. That's the biggest reason that I no longer consider myself to be like a tried and true Georgia fan, because I was so mad with how they had played that day that it just ruined my entire day. I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to see anyone. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't have this level of investment needed to enjoy this aspect of it when the negatives are so much. So losing to Georgia Tech is always the worst. Yes, maybe it's because I'm from the metro Atlanta area, but I have Georgia Tech at 1, Florida at 2, Auburn at 3, and Alabama at number 4 as Georgia's rivals.
Stop trying to make Auburn happen.
That's good.
Notable omissions, right? Nobody mentioned Clemson, which we started the year with, which is probably more of an 80s rivalry. And it really feels like those SEC East teams, the South Carolinas of the world, which if you ever had one, maybe for a few years, Spurrier, it's going to go away now that we don't have divisions.
Right, and I even wonder about Tennessee-Auburn going forward. If those aren't protected rivalry games, does that change sort of how it's viewed in the grander sense? Because right now, yes, Georgia is going to play Auburn and Tennessee next year, but if they go to a 9-game schedule, if they stay at 8 and they only protect one rivalry, it'll certainly be Georgia-Florida. What does that do to those rivalries going forward? It is a big sticking point. It's a big reason why scheduling has been such an issue for the SEC for so long. And so I'm really interested in seeing the way that the schedule and the way college football continues to change, how that impacts specifically those Tennessee and those Auburn rivalries.
Which one would be more important to keep? Georgia-Auburn, you think? Well, obviously you're going to say Auburn.
Georgia-Auburn, because it's the Deep South's oldest rivalry. And I think that's why, for me, just the name. If Georgia-Tennessee had a better rivalry name, maybe I feel differently about it. But the games that have those iconic rivalry names, Georgia-Florida, it's not Florida-Georgia. Florida-Georgia is a band. Georgia-Florida is the name of the rivalry game. Clean old-fashioned hate, Deep South's oldest rivalry. Third Saturday in October. Those games are the games that we need to keep in college football. Otherwise, it does just turn into a minor league version of the NFL.
Cody, we're going to need you to come back on.
Here I am.
Love seeing that smiling face. All right, this is the part in the show where we are going to try to predict who's going to score a touchdown in the upcoming game, and I'm so excited I can barely wipe the smile off my face. I finally have a point on the board. Shout out Trevor Etienne. And I'm now tied with Cody.
Yeah, but you guys are now actually...
Whoa. I said tight end 1 last week. Didn't I say tight end 1?
I think you said Oscar Dell.
Depends on what your definition is.
Yeah, maybe I meant Lawson Lucky.
Yeah.
Okay, he had a 2-point conversion too.
He did.
No, can't give me Lawson Lucky.
I can't give you Lawson Lucky.
All right. Yeah, you guys won.
I would have given it to you, but we'll let Connor make the decision.
You're going to make me the bad guy. He said Oscar Dell.
No, I said Oscar Dell. That's fair.
Yeah.
Who did you have last week, Connor? Remind us.
I had Dylan Bell, who had not one, but 2 touchdowns in the 41-34 loss, both in the fourth quarter, both on back-to-back plays.
So we all three have guessed one game so far this year now?
I have 2.
He has 2.
I hit
Oh,
Trevor
you
Etienne.
hit twice.
Nope.
No, I
you
had Dylan
didn't.
Bell.
You
Right?
did.
Yeah, I'm 2 for 2 on Dylan Bell.
And Tennessee Tech. Okay.
Yep.
Connor's just going to have
So who we got this week? Kaylee, go first.
I'm going to take a flyer this week for the purpose of switching things up. I'm going to take the new tight end one, Lawson Lucky.
Okay, interesting. Austin Lucky played more snaps than Oscar Delp against Alabama. I'll be interested in seeing sort of what his role looks like because I do think they found something there with him. Cody, you go next.
All right, this week, I've been so bad at this. I'm going to go back. I just got to go safe. I'm going to say safe is Colby Young, so I'll go Colby Young this week.
The red zone guy.
I'm going to take Dylan Bell
oh my
again. I'm 2 for 2 with him. I think he's Georgia's go-to receiver. I think that, when they get him involved, good things tend to happen. He's a red zone threat because he can run it or catch it. We've even seen him throw for a touchdown pass before. So I'm going to take my layup, and I'm going to take Dylan Bell here.
Hey, if Connor gets it this week, we're going to implement a new rule that you can only take a player so many times.
So you don't want Dylan Bell to
This
keep
isn't good
scoring.
television, Connor.
I do think Dylan Bell and Carson Beck, they found a connection last week, and I don't know if it was just a confidence booster game, but that seems to be his go-to guy now, even maybe over Dominic Lovett. I think having that history of that big play at the end, he knows he can trust him. I think he's going to be probably the top wide receiver target moving forward.
I would just point out as well, in the games that which I have picked Dylan Bell to score a touchdown, he has scored a touchdown. In the games that I have not, he has not. So you saying that if you're going to block me from taking Dylan Bell, that you no longer want Dylan Bell to score touchdowns and thus help this team win?
It's not about that. It's about the fact that the limit does need to exist here because this is not good for viewership. This is not good television. We've got to start taking some flyers.
Hey, look.
Next week, we're going to have to do a defensive player. I'm going to call that right now.
Okay.
We're going to mix it up
Well,
for Mississippi
Connor's
State.
going to take Jalen Walker. Let's just go ahead and write it down. All right.
We'll have to wait and see.
We'll go ahead and wrap up so Connor can get back to Athens. I'll go ahead and I'll start. I'm so proud of you. First off, I learned that you can go an entire show without being on your phone, and even though that was by force, I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. And let's see, what did I learn today? I learned that she doesn't even go here, and she just has a lot of feelings, okay?
Feelings?
Yeah. No.
I am proud of our Mean Girls references that we did on today's show. In case if y'all have stayed with us this entire show, today is National Mean Girls Day. They're showing it in tons of theaters everywhere tonight. So maybe go see it, even though it is a more, I don't want to say relatively new movie, but this sort of generation. Momo and Pawpaw love this movie, and you will too.
Go see the original,
Yeah.
and in my mind, the only one. No disrespect to the 2024 one, but we don't recognize that. Anyway, I've got to go drink some cranberry juice. I really want to lose 3 pounds.
Okay. All right, we're going to end on that. I can't make it any better than that. DawgNation, you go, Glenn Coco. Thanks for coming in and watching today's episode of DawgNation at Large. We'll see you right back here next Thursday at 7 o'clock.